At a family dinner, my son-in-law and his mother suddenly stood up, snatched my daughter's cane, and hurled it across the room, shouting, "You are not disabled, you are just a burden who loves the attention. Stop the act." The whole room erupted in mocking laughter. I watched my daughter collapse onto the cold floor, slowly rose from my chair, pulled out my phone, and spoke exactly 5 words. Every smile in that room died instantly. Welcome back to Dad's Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for joining our community today. Where are you tuning in from? Let me know your city or country in the comments. Please note certain dramatic details in this narrative are fictionalized for entertainment. Any similarity to real names or settings is strictly coincidental, but the core lesson remains very real. My name is Raymond Holloway. Most people call me Ray. I am 57 years old, and I have spent the better part of 3 decades with grease under my fingernails and the smell of motor oil in my clothes. I run a one-man garage on Kelsey Avenue in Dayton, Ohio. The sign above the door says Holloway Auto. The letters faded from green to gray sometime around 2015, and I never got around to repainting them. My regulars know where to find me. That was always enough. I want to tell you about my daughter. Lily Holloway was 27 years old on the morning everything changed. She had her mother's dark eyes and my stubbornness, and she wore both like they were the same thing. She worked as a graphic designer for a marketing firm downtown, the kind of job where she sat in front of 2 computer screens and made things look beautiful for people who did not know how. She was good at it. Her boss had called her twice in 2 years to offer her a raise before she even asked. That was Lily, the kind of person good things moved toward without being chased. But the thing Lily loved more than any job, more than any paycheck, was running. Every morning without exception, she was out the door by 5 o'clock. She had a pair of New Balance running shoes, navy blue with white trim, and she kept them on the small wooden rack beside the front door, so she would never waste time looking for them. She ran the same route every morning down Birchwood Drive, past the elementary school on Crestwood, up the long hill toward the water tower and back. 4 miles, 40 minutes every single day. She had been doing it since she was 22. She told me once that running was the only time of day when nobody needed anything from her. No deadlines, no clients, no emails. Just her lungs and the road. I used to worry about her running in the dark. Dayton in March is cold and gray before sunrise, and Birchwood Drive does not have streetlights past the first half-mile. I told her this exactly once. She looked at me the way only daughters look at fathers who say things like that and said, "Dad, I've been doing this for 5 years. I know every crack in that road." I did not bring it up again. That is the particular helplessness of being the father of a capable woman. I need to tell you about Derek. Derek Ashford had been dating Lily for a little over 2 years when March of 2021 arrived. He was 31, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy smile that makes people in rooms feel like they are the ones he came to see. He sold commercial real estate for a mid-sized firm in Cincinnati, and drove a white Audi Q5 that he washed every Saturday morning without fail. He wore pressed shirts on weekends. He remembered the names of waiters. I want to be fair to the memory of who I thought he was back then. He brought Lily flowers on ordinary Tuesdays. He fixed the garbage disposal in her apartment without being asked. When Lily's cat got sick in November of 2020, Derek drove 40 minutes to the emergency vet at midnight and sat with her in the waiting room for 3 hours. Lily told me that story with her whole face lit up, and I smiled because she was happy, and I told myself that my unease about him was just the standard reluctance of a father watching his daughter choose someone else to need. But there was something. There had always been something. The first time I met Derek. We shook hands at Lily's apartment, and he held the shake about 1 second longer than necessary, while his eyes moved across my face like he was calculating something. Lily's mother, Diane, thought I was reading too much into it. Diane was probably right. She usually was. My oldest daughter, Grace, thought Derek was, and I am quoting her directly, the best thing that had happened to Lily in years. Grandma Ruth, my mother, 71 years old, who had been reading people since before most of them were born, sat across from Derek at Christmas dinner in 2020 and said nothing about him at all the entire evening. Afterward in the kitchen, while we did the dishes, she handed me a plate and said, "Raymond, that young man answers questions before you finish asking them." I filed that away without knowing what to do with it. The night of March 13th was a Friday. Lily had dinner at our house, mine and Diane's place on Carver Street, the house where she and Grace had grown up. Diane made pot roast, which was Lily's favorite, and Derek came with a bottle of red wine he had clearly researched because he mentioned the vineyard twice. Grace was there with her boyfriend. Grandma Ruth sat at the head of the table the way she always did, like she had never relinquished the position even after my father passed. Dinner was easy that evening. Lily laughed a lot. Derek kept her wine glass filled and told a story about a commercial property deal that had gone sideways that made everyone at the table lean forward. Even I laughed. Even Ruth smiled, though she aimed it at Lily rather than at Derek. After dessert, Lily helped Diane clear the plates, while Derek and I sat on the back porch with our coffee mugs. The night air was cold and sharp. The yard light threw a pale yellow circle on the dead grass. Derek asked me how the garage business was going. I told him March was slow, always slow, but my contract with Bellhaven Transport, a local trucking company I had been servicing for 11 years, kept things steady through the lean months. He nodded and asked a few questions that were sharp enough to tell me he understood business, and I found myself thinking that whatever my unease about him was, it did not come from his intelligence. Lily came to the door at 9:15 and said she needed to get home. She had a 5 o'clock alarm. She kissed my cheek at the front door, and I hugged her the way I always did, one hand on her back, brief and solid. She smelled like her mother's kitchen, like pot roast and dish soap. "Get some sleep," I told her. "I always do, Dad." She pulled her jacket on and grinned. "Don't worry so much." Derek shook my hand again at the door. That same fraction of a second, too long. I told myself I was being difficult. I watched their car back out of the driveway. The Audi's headlights swept across the front of the house, and then they were gone. I went to bed at 10:30. I am an early riser by habit. The garage opens at 7, and I like an hour to myself before that. I was awake by 4:15 the next morning. I heard Lily's front door close in my mind, the way parents hear things even when they are miles away. She would be lacing up her navy New Balance shoes right now. She would be stepping out into the dark of Birchwood Drive. I put the kettle on. I measured coffee into the French press. I stood at my kitchen window and watched the sky above the rooftops begin to shift from black to the particular dark blue that comes just before dawn in March. I was thinking about nothing. I was thinking about the Bellhaven contract renewal coming up in April. I was thinking about whether I needed to replace the lift in Bay 2. The phone rang at 6:22 in the morning. I did not recognize the number. I answered it because I always answer numbers I do not recognize before 7 in the morning. Something in a father's nervous system is always on call. "Is this Raymond Holloway?" The voice was a woman's, older, shaking at the edges. "This is Ray. Mr. Holloway, my name is Wendy Marsh. I live on Birchwood Drive. I need you to come to Dayton General right now. Your daughter has been in an accident." Her voice broke cleanly on the last word. The way a voice breaks when the person speaking is holding themselves together by willpower alone. "She's alive. But please come right now, please. I set the coffee mug down on the counter. It made a sound. I heard the sound very clearly. The kettle was still steaming. I did not turn off the kettle. I did not stop to find my coat. I picked up my keys from the hook by the door, and I walked out of my house into the cold March air, and I drove to Dayton General with both hands on the wheel and the heat in my truck blowing full on my face. I did not know it then. But the last ordinary morning of my life had already ended while I was standing at that kitchen window thinking about a fleet contract and a hydraulic lift. I ran 2 red lights on the way to Dayton General. I am not proud of that. I am also not sorry. The drive from Carver Street to the hospital is 11 minutes on a normal morning. I made it in 7. I parked crooked across 2 spaces in the emergency lot and did not fix it. I remember the automatic doors of the ER sliding open and the smell hitting me first, antiseptic and recycled air, and something underneath that. I have no word for the smell of a place where people arrive without warning and leave changed. A nurse at the front desk looked up when I came through. I told her my daughter's name. She picked up a phone, said something I could not hear, and pointed me toward a set of double doors at the end of the corridor. I pushed through them, and a doctor in green scrubs was already walking toward me with his hands at his sides and his face arranged in the particular careful expression that medical people practice until it becomes second nature. Mr. Holloway. He extended his hand. I'm Dr. Fenwick. Your daughter is in surgery right now. She sustained a pelvic fracture in 2 places and significant trauma to her left sciatic nerve. We are doing everything we can, and she is stable. But I need you to understand, this is going to be a long recovery. I heard every word. I processed none of them. I shook his hand and asked where I could wait. He pointed me to a small waiting area off the main corridor, 6 chairs upholstered in blue vinyl, a side table with a half-empty box of tissues, a mounted television playing a morning news program with the sound turned off. I sat in the chair closest to the wall. I put my elbows on my knees and my face in my hands, and I sat there for a long time without moving. Wendy Marsh found me 20 minutes later. She was a small woman in her late 60s, white hair pulled back, still wearing the walking shoes and fleece jacket she had been wearing when she found Lily on Birchwood Drive. Her hands would not stop moving. She kept pressing them together, releasing them, pressing them together again. The way hands move when a person has seen something they cannot unsee and the body is still trying to shake it loose. I walk that road every morning at the same time, she told me, sitting in the chair beside mine, leaning forward so our voices stayed between us. 6 o'clock exactly. I saw her on the shoulder right past the old Mercer mailbox. She was... Wendy stopped. She pressed her lips together hard. I called 911 immediately. I stayed with her until the ambulance came. I held her hand, Mr. Holloway. I want you to know that. She was not alone. My throat closed on whatever I was going to say. I reached over and put my hand over hers, and we sat like that for a moment. 2 strangers connected by my daughter lying on a cold road in the dark. Did you see the vehicle? I asked. Wendy shook her head. Gone by the time I got there. I heard an engine, something accelerating fast heading back toward the Crestwood intersection. But I never saw it. She looked at me with eyes that carried the specific grief of a witness who wishes they could give more. I'm so sorry, Mr. Holloway. I'm so terribly sorry. She left after another few minutes. I watched her go, and I thought that there are people in this world who show up for strangers in the worst moments of their lives and ask for nothing, and Wendy Marsh was one of them. I had been sitting alone for about 40 minutes when I heard footsteps in the corridor, 2 sets moving quickly. I looked up. Derek Ashford came through the double doors first. His shirt was pressed. His hair was combed. His eyes were red at the edges, and he was holding his phone in one hand, with his knuckles white around it. He scanned the waiting room, found me, and crossed the room in 4 strides. "Ray." His voice cracked on my name. "Ray, I just heard. I came as fast as I could. How is she? What are the doctors saying?" Behind him, a woman walked in at a slower pace. I had met Margaret Ashford exactly twice, once at a dinner Lily had organized 6 months earlier, once briefly at a birthday gathering. She was 60, well-dressed in the way of women who consider appearance a form of discipline, with silver hair, cut close, and eyes that were light gray and very still. She was not crying. Her face held the composed, watchful expression of someone who had already decided how they were going to behave in this room before they walked into it. I stood and told Derek what Dr. Fenwick had told me. His face crumpled at the words, "pelvic fracture," and he sat down heavily in the nearest chair, pressing the heels of both hands against his eyes. His shoulders shook. I watched his shoulders shake, and I felt something move in my chest, not warmth exactly, but the recognition of what appeared to be genuine grief, and I thought, whatever else he is, he loves her. Margaret sat across from us. She asked me careful questions: which surgeon, which floor? What was the estimated surgery time? Her voice stayed level, and her hands rested in her lap. She did not reach for Derek. She did not cry. When I answered her questions, she nodded once after each answer, like she was recording the information and storing it somewhere I could not see. At one point, Derek stood up to find a vending machine, and Margaret leaned toward me slightly. "Derek has been beside himself since he heard," she said. "He called me the moment he got the news. He drove straight here." She paused. "He loves your daughter very much, Raymond." "I know he does," I said. She held my gaze for 2 seconds longer than the sentence required. Then she sat back and folded her hands again. I thought about that look for a long time afterward. At the time, I told myself she was simply a mother worried about her son's distress. I told myself her composure was the composure of a woman who handled difficulty by controlling her reactions. It was only later, much later, that I understood what I had actually been watching. Derek returned with 2 coffees in paper cups. He handed me one without being asked. He sat beside me, and we drank in the specific silence of a hospital waiting room. The television flickering soundlessly above us. The corridor outside steady with the soft footfall of nurses changing shifts. Derek held his coffee in both hands. He stared at the floor between his shoes. Then he said something so quietly I almost missed it. "I keep thinking about her out there on that road." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Who does something like that, Ray? Who hits someone and just drives away?" I looked at the side of his face. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on a point on the floor, with the intense, hollow focus of a man trying very hard not to look anywhere else. "I don't know," I said. He nodded. He drank his coffee. I did not know it then. But I was sitting 3 feet away from the answer to my own question, and he had just handed me a cup of coffee. And somewhere above us, my daughter was in surgery, and none of us in that waiting room were who we appeared to be. Lily came out of surgery at 4:17 in the afternoon. Dr. Fenwick found me in the waiting room where I had been sitting for nearly 10 hours. He told me the surgery had gone as well as they could have hoped. The 2 pelvic fractures had been stabilized with internal fixation, titanium screws set into the bone to hold the structure while it healed. The sciatic nerve on her left side had been bruised badly at the L4 junction, not severed, which he said was the difference between a long recovery and no recovery at all. He told me she would not walk unassisted for many months. He told me whether she would ever run again was a conversation for another day. I nodded after each sentence. I thanked him. I asked if I could see her. She was in a room on the third floor, pale and small against the white hospital sheets, a monitor tracking her heartbeat in a steady green line beside the bed. Both her arms had IV lines. Her left leg was elevated. Someone had brushed her hair back from her face, and she looked younger than 27. She looked like the girl who used to fall asleep on the couch watching Saturday morning cartoons, while I drank my coffee at the kitchen table and pretended not to watch her. I sat in the chair beside her bed, and I held her hand for 2 hours without speaking. Derek sat on the other side. Margaret had gone to get food for everyone, she said. She came back with sandwiches in paper bags and set them on the window ledge, and nobody ate them. At 7 o'clock, a nurse came in and said immediate family only for overnight. Derek looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then he said, "Ray, go home and get some rest. I'll stay with her tonight. I'm not going anywhere." His voice was firm, and his eyes were steady, and I believed him completely. I drove home through the dark. I did not go inside the house right away. I sat in my truck in the driveway for several minutes with the engine off and the cold seeping in through the door seals. The porch light was on. Diane had left it on. Through the front, I could see the living room lamp, and I knew she was awake inside, waiting, and I could not make myself go in and say the words out loud yet. I got out of the truck. I walked around the side of the house to the garage. I do not know exactly why I went there first. The garage has always been where I go when I do not know what else to do with myself. It smells like oil and cold metal and rubber, and those smells have meant safety to me since I was 19 years old, learning the trade from my Uncle Bill in his shop in Kettering. I pushed open the side door and reached for the light switch. The fluorescent tubes flickered twice and came on. The white Audi Q5 was parked in Bay 2. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. The garage had been locked when I left that morning. I lock it every night out of habit. The same key on the same ring for 22 years. But the side door had opened without resistance, which meant someone had used the spare key. I walked slowly around the vehicle. The front right portion of the windshield had a starred crack, the kind that radiates outward from a single point of impact. The way glass breaks when something solid and fast makes contact with it. The front bumper had a deep crease along the right side, the paint scraped away to bare metal in a long diagonal line. There were other marks I recognized immediately, from years of bodywork transfer marks, the kind left when a vehicle makes contact with something softer than itself at speed. My stomach turned over once hard, and then went very still. I crouched in front of the bumper. I looked at the crease for a long time. Then I stood up and walked to my workbench and sat on the stool there and stared at the far wall where my socket set hung in order of size the way it had for 20 years, Grace. My oldest daughter was 30 years old. She had a tendency to speed on the highway, which I had argued with her about since she got her license at 16. 2 nights before, she had borrowed a white sedan from her friend Kara because her own car was in the shop. I had not thought about that until this moment. White. Early morning. Birchwood Drive was on the route between Kara's apartment and Grace's place. The thought arrived fully formed, and I could not push it back out. I picked up my phone from the workbench. I held it in my hand. I looked at the Audi. I looked at the phone. A mechanic knows what he is looking at when he looks at a damaged vehicle. A father knows what it means to make a phone call that cannot be unmade. Grace was my firstborn. She had her mother's laugh and my temper and a good heart underneath both. She had been at Lily's side in that hospital waiting room by noon, red-eyed and trembling, clutching Lily's spare house key in her fist, because she had not known what else to bring. If I called the police right now, I would hand them a vehicle that pointed at my own daughter. I set the phone face down on the workbench. I told myself I needed more information before I did anything. I told myself I was being methodical, careful, reasonable. I told myself a lot of things that night standing in my cold garage under the fluorescent lights, with the smell of motor oil around me and a cracked windshield 10 feet away. What I was actually doing was making a choice. The kind of choice that looks like protection and turns out to be a cage. The side door opened behind me. Diane stood in the frame with her coat pulled over her nightgown and her eyes swollen from crying. "Raymond." Her voice broke on my name. "Come inside. Please. Tell me how she is." I looked at the Audi one more time. Then I walked to the light switch and turned off the fluorescents. "She's going to need a long time to heal," I said. "But she's going to be okay." I put my arm around Diane's shoulders and walked her back toward the house. I did not tell her about the car. I did not tell anyone. That decision made in less than 4 minutes in a cold garage on a March night would sit inside me like a stone for the next 3 years. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed beside Diane with my eyes open and the ceiling above me gray in the dark, and I listened to her breathe. She had cried herself to exhaustion and gone under sometime around midnight, her hand still loosely holding mine, the way it does when she falls asleep before she means to. I did not move my hand. I did not want to wake her. I lay there, and I thought about the Audi in Bay 2, and I thought about Grace, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, I made the second decision of that week that I would spend years trying to live with. I was going to make the car disappear. At 4:15, I got up quietly dressed in the dark and went to the garage. I had already decided where I was going. Pete Grover ran a body shop called Grover's Auto Reconditioning off Route 36 outside Springfield, Illinois, 2 hours and 40 minutes southwest of Dayton on a clear morning. I had known Pete since 1998, when we had worked neighboring bays at a dealership in Columbus for 8 months before he moved back to his hometown. Pete was this kind of man who did not ask questions that were not his business. And over 23 years, I had sent him 3 referrals and covered a parts invoice once when his books were short. He owed me, and more importantly, he trusted me, and even more importantly than that, he was far enough away that nobody in Dayton would connect his shop to anything involving my family. I drove the Audi out of the garage at 4:30 in the morning. The streets of Dayton were empty and orange under the highway lights. I kept to the speed limit exactly. My own truck was left in the driveway. I would need someone to drive me back, and I had already called my brother-in-law Frank from the garage phone and told him I needed a favor, no questions early. Frank was that kind of man. He said he would meet me in Springfield at 8. The drive down I-70 took 2 hours and 50 minutes. I had the radio off. The Audi was a smoother ride than my F-150, and I hated it for that. Hated the leather seats and the quiet engine, and the way the navigation screen glowed blue in the dark. I kept both hands on the wheel and I watched the highway, and I did not let myself think about anything except the distance between mile markers. Pete was already at the shop when I pulled in at 7:20. He came out of the side door, wiping his hands on a shop rag. A heavy-set man in his late 50s with a gray beard and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked at the Audi. He looked at me. He did not say anything for a moment. "Ray," he said finally. "Pete." I got out and shook his hand. "I need the front end sorted. Windshield replaced, bumper pulled, and repainted, any transfer marks cleaned off the fascia. I need it back to showroom." He walked around the front of the vehicle, slowly crouching at the bumper, the way a man does when he is reading a story written in metal. He stood up and looked at me again. "You want to tell me what happened?" "No," I said. "I don't. He held my gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded once the way men of a certain age and profession nod when they have decided to trust someone they have known for 20 years. $4,350, he said. Cash. I'll have it done by end of day Friday. I'll wire the cash ray. I understood. No record. I had brought cash from the safe in my office. I keep an emergency fund. There always have the way men who grew up without much always keep something physical they can touch. I counted it out on his workbench. He did not count it again after me. Frank picked me up at 8:15 outside the shop and drove me back to Dayton in his Silverado without asking a single question, the entire 2 hours and 40 minutes. That is the kind of brother-in-law Frank is. When he dropped me at Carver Street, he put his hand briefly on my shoulder and said, "You doing okay?" I said yes. He nodded and drove away. I have never told Frank what that morning was actually about, and he has never asked. I went straight to the hospital. Lily was awake for the first time, groggy and pale, her hand warm when I took it. She looked up at me and tried to smile, and the smile came out crooked because of the pain medication. "Hey, Dad," she said. Her voice was thin as paper. "Hey, baby girl." I squeezed her hand. "I'm right here." Did they catch whoever did it? The question hit me somewhere behind the sternum. I kept my face level. I had been a father for 30 years, and if fatherhood teaches you one thing above all others, it is how to keep your face level when everything beneath it is breaking. "Not yet," I said, "but you don't worry about that right now." She closed her eyes. Her grip on my hand loosened as she drifted back under. I sat there for a long time after watching the green line of her heart monitor move its steady peaks across the screen. The tidings in that room traveled fast in the days after. Wendy Marsh told 2 neighbors. Those neighbors told the block association. By the end of the week, the story of a hit and run on Birchwood Drive had moved through our corner of Dayton, the way bad news moves through close communities quickly, with detail added at every stop. People started asking Ray Holloway what he knew. Did he know the car? Did he have any idea who? I shook my head every time. I looked people in the eye, and I shook my head, and I said I hoped the police would find whoever did it. Every word of that was true. Every word of it was also a performance, and I knew it, and the knowing sat in my chest like the wrong kind of weight. It was Grandma Ruth who found me 9 days after the accident, sitting alone in the garage after closing with the lights low. She walked in without knocking, she never knocked, and pulled a stool up to my workbench and sat down across from me with her hands folded on top of each other, the way she does when she has decided something needs to be said. "Raymond," she said, "you're carrying something. I can see it on you the same way I could see it on your father when he was keeping something from me." She paused. "I'm not going to ask you what it is, but I want you to know that whatever you did it because you love your children. And whatever comes from it, I'm still here." My throat tightened so hard I could not answer her for a moment. "Thanks, Mama," I said finally. She patted my hand once, stood up, and walked back out into the night. I sat in the garage for another hour after she left in the dark, with the smell of oil and cold metal around me, and the weight of what I had done pressing down on my shoulders like something I had agreed to carry without being told how long the road was. 9 months is a long time to watch a performance and tell yourself you are not watching one. From March through December of 2021, Derek Ashford drove my daughter to physical therapy 112 times. I know that number because I counted, and I counted because he made sure everyone noticed. Stamford Rehabilitation Center 3 sessions a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, without exception. He posted about it on his social media page every few weeks. A photo of his hands on the steering wheel, the caption reading, "Whatever it takes," or a shot of the rehab parking lot, with something like "proud of this woman" every single day underneath it. People who knew Lily shared those posts. Her coworkers commented heart emojis. A woman from their church wrote that Derek was proof that real love shows up. I saw those posts because Grace showed them to me on her phone at Sunday dinners. She held the screen toward me with a look on her face that said, "See, Dad, you were wrong about him." I smiled and handed the phone back and said nothing. Here is what I noticed that Grace did not. Derek drove Lily to therapy 112 times, and in 112 trips he never once called me to ask if I wanted to ride along. He never suggested I meet them there. When I showed up at Stamford Rehabilitation on a Wednesday morning in June, unannounced with a bag of Lily's favorite butterscotch candies from the pharmacy on 5th, Derek met me in the lobby with a smile so warm and so immediate that it felt rehearsed. "Ray, she is going to be so happy you're here," he said, and he guided me to a chair in the waiting area with one hand at my elbow. The way a host guides a guest to a seat at a party, and I sat in that chair for 45 minutes while my daughter worked with her physical therapist 30 feet away behind a frosted glass partition, and I thought about the hand at my elbow the entire time. At the end of the session, when Lily came out in her wheelchair, her face lit up when she saw me, and she reached for my hand and said, "Dad, you came." And those two words, "you came," as though my being there required explanation, landed in my chest like something I would not be able to name for a long time. The months folded into each other, the way months do when you are waiting for something without admitting to yourself that you are waiting. Lily progressed slowly, the way Dr. Fenwick had said she would. By August, she had some feeling returned to her left foot. By October, she could stand briefly with assistance. The titanium screws in her pelvis held. The nerve damage on her left side was healing at its own pace, indifferent to anyone's schedule. I visited when Derek allowed it, which was not as often as I would have liked, and I told myself that was a normal adjustment for a young couple managing a serious medical situation together. I brought food. I sat with Lily while she watched television. I fixed a cabinet hinge in her kitchen that had been loose for 2 months. Small things. Father things. The only things I was being permitted. Then December arrived. Detective Ray Hansen called me on a Tuesday morning, the 9th of December. He had a careful voice, the voice of a man who had made many calls like this one over a long career and had learned to deliver difficulty without drama. He told me that the Dayton Police Department was moving the Birchwood Drive case to inactive status. No traffic cameras on that stretch of road. No witnesses beyond Wendy Marsh, who had seen only an empty road when she arrived. No vehicle match from any body shop reports in the tri-state area. Without a vehicle or a plate. "Mr. Holloway, we don't have a path forward," he said. "I want you to know this file is not closed permanently. If new evidence comes forward at any point, we reopen it. That's how it works in Ohio. The statute of limitations on felony hit and run causing serious injury is 6 years. You have time." "Thank you, Detective," I said. I wrote the cold case file number in the small leather notebook I kept in my shirt pocket. Case number DPD 2000. I wrote it in the same careful block letters I use when I am noting a part number on a work order. I put the note back in my pocket. I carried that notebook every day for the next 3 years, to the garage, to the grocery store, to family dinners, to the hospital, everywhere. The number was always there. A reminder of what I was still owed. 4 days after, Detective Hansen called me. Derek took Lily to dinner at Rosewood, the Italian restaurant on 5th, where they had their first date. He had reserved the back corner table. He had ordered her favorite, the mushroom risotto, in advance. He had a small jewelry box in his jacket pocket. Lily called me from the restaurant parking lot, her voice so full of happiness it was almost painful to hear. "Dad," she said, "Derek just asked me to marry him." I gripped the phone. Outside my garage window, the December street was gray and bare, a thin frost on the sidewalk, a delivery truck idling at the corner. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said. My voice came out steady and warm. I have spent 30 years learning to make my voice do what I need it to do for my children's sake. "Are you happy?" "I'm so happy, Dad. I'm so happy." "Then I'm happy too," I said. "Tell him I said congratulations." I set the phone down on the workbench. I sat on my stool. I looked at the case number in my notebook. I looked at it for a long time, in the quiet of my empty garage, while the frost thickened on the sidewalk outside, and the delivery truck finally moved on. Somewhere across the city, my daughter was in a restaurant parking lot, in a wheelchair with a diamond ring on her finger, crying. Happy tears all over her fiancé's pressed shirt, and I was sitting in my garage with a cold case number, and a feeling I still could not put a name to except that it had been living in my chest since the morning I found that white Audi in Bay 2, and it had not loosened its grip once in 9 months. I closed the notebook. I put it in my shirt pocket. I turned off the garage lights and went inside. I own one suit. I bought it in 2009 for my father-in-law's funeral. A charcoal gray 2-button from a department store in Columbus that Diane picked out, because I have no judgment about such things. I have worn it 4 times since 2 funerals, 1 retirement dinner for a man I worked with for 15 years, and the night Diane and I renewed our vows on our 25th anniversary, in the backyard with just the girls and Grandma Ruth, and a bottle of champagne we had been saving since 1998. It still fits, more or less. The jacket pulls a little across the shoulders now. I did not buy a new one for my daughter's wedding, because it did not occur to me that I needed to, and also because some part of me was not sure what I was celebrating. The wedding was on a Saturday in March of 2022. St. Andrew's Lutheran on Greenfield Road, the church where Lily had been confirmed at 13, and where Diane sang in the choir every other Sunday for 11 years. 200 guests. White roses on every pew end. A string quartet playing something classical in the vestibule that I could not name but that Lily had probably chosen with great care. I walked Lily down the aisle in her wheelchair. That had been her decision made quietly and firmly the previous October, when Diane had suggested they wait until Lily could walk. Lily had looked at her mother and said, "Mom, I am not waiting to live my life for my legs to catch up." I had not been in the room when she said it, but Grace told me later, and when Grace told me, I had to turn toward my garage window for a moment, because my eyes were doing something I did not want witnessed. She was beautiful. She wore her grandmother's pearl earrings and a dress with long sleeves and a full skirt that spread across the wheelchair like something from a painting. When I bent to kiss her cheek at the altar and handed her off to Derek, she whispered, "Don't cry, Dad." I told her I was not crying. She said, "Your face is lying." Derek took her hand and smiled at me over her head, and I smiled back, and I went to find my seat. My seat was at table 11. St. Andrew's Reception Hall holds 20 tables of 10. The head table ran along the far wall, Derek and Lily at center, their wedding party fanned out on both sides, champagne glasses already filled. Tables 1 through 5 were her immediate family, Diane at table 2, with Grace and Grandma Ruth, and assorted cousins. Tables 6 through 10 were the Ashford side, their friends and business associates, and the kind of people who arrive at weddings already knowing where the open bar is. Table 11 was in the back left corner near the door to the kitchen. My table mates were Frank and his wife, two of Lily's college friends. I had met once a coworker of Derek's whose name I did not catch, and Pastor Glenn Whitaker, who served as the family's spiritual advisor and had been invited by Diane. Pastor Glenn was 63, a lean man with close-cropped white hair and the kind of steady eyes that come from spending decades sitting with people in their worst moments. He had led our family through my father-in-law's funeral and Grace's miscarriage 2 years prior, and he had the particular gift of knowing when to speak and when to simply be present. He sat down beside me at table 11, looked around the room once and poured water into both our glasses. "How are you holding up, Ray?" he asked. "I'm good," I said. He looked at me with those steady eyes. "You sure about that?" "No," I said. "But I'm here." He nodded and did not push further. That is the thing about Pastor Glenn. He accepts the truth you give him and does not demand more than you have. Derek's best man gave a toast that drew laughter from every table. Margaret Ashford sat at table 3 center of the Ashford side, in a cream-colored dress and a strand of pearls, her silver hair perfect. Her posture, the posture of a woman who had decided many years ago how she intended to be perceived and had not deviated since. She laughed at exactly the right moments. She touched Diane's arm twice during the evening, in the warm, conspiratorial way of mothers, sharing the same joy, and Diane leaned into it both times, and I watched that from across the room and felt the unease in my chest shift into something more specific that I still could not name. Derek stood for his own toast 40 minutes into the reception. He held his champagne glass and looked out at 200 people, and he said, "I want everyone in this room to understand something. I did not marry Lily Holloway of what she has been through this past year. I married her because of who she is, because she is the strongest person I have ever known, because watching her fight her way back has shown me what real courage looks like. And I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure Arma knows and she is loved." The room erupted, standing ovation from at least half the tables. Diane pressed both hands to her mouth. Grace wiped her eyes with a cocktail napkin. Even Grandma Ruth, who expressed approval sparingly and strategically, inclined her head. I clapped. My hands made the right sound at the right time. I kept my eyes on Derek's face while I clapped, and I watched him receive the room's love with an ease and a warmth that was either genuine or the most convincing thing I had ever seen, and I still could not tell which, and that uncertainty was its own particular kind of anguish. At some point in the evening, I found myself standing near the edge of the room with a glass of water watching the dance floor. Lily had been helped to her feet by Derek for one slow song, her arms around his neck, barely moving her head against his shoulder. The photographer was circling them. The string quartet was playing something soft. Margaret appeared beside me without my noticing her arrival. She had a way of doing that, materializing at your elbow, the way a draft comes under a door. "She looks happy," Margaret said. "She does," I said. Margaret turned her glass slowly in her hand. "You know, Raymond Derek talked about waiting about whether to propose now or give Lily more time to recover. I told him that Lily needed stability, that she needed to know she had someone committed to her future." She paused. "I hope you agree that was the right advice." I looked at her. Her eyes were forward, watching the dance floor, her profile smooth and certain. "I appreciate Derek's commitment to Lily," I said carefully. She smiled, still watching the dancers. "Good," she said. "That's all any of us want, for Lily to be taken care of." She moved away a moment later, back toward her table, her heels quiet on the hardwood. I stood where I was for a moment, water glass in hand, and I thought about what she had just said. For Lily to be taken care of. The words were warm. The architecture behind them was not. I went back to table 11. Pastor Glenn was still there finishing his coffee. He looked at me when I sat down. "You doing okay?" he asked again. "Pastor Glenn," I said, "I am watching something in this room, and I cannot figure out exactly what it is." He considered that for a moment. Then he said, "Ray, in my experience, when a man like you says he cannot figure out what he is watching, he usually already knows. He just does not want to be right." I looked at the dance floor. Derek was spinning Lily gently, one hand on her waist, one hand holding hers, his smile wide and easy, and aimed at every camera in the room. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Maybe so." The phone call from Belhaven Transport came on a Tuesday morning in June, 3 months after the wedding. I was under a freightliner in Bay 1 when my cell phone buzzed on the workbench. I slid out, wiped my hands, and picked it up. The voice on the other end belonged to Gary Phelps, the operations manager at Belhaven, who had signed my service contract 11 years ago and renewed it every April without discussion. Gary was not a man who called for small reasons. "Ray, he said, "I'm going to get straight to the point because I think you deserve that. We're not going to be renewing the contract this cycle." I stood very still. The freightliner's undercarriage dripped oil slowly onto the shop floor behind me. "Gary, can you tell me why?" I was quiet for a moment. "We've been hearing some things, Ray, about parts sourcing, about invoices that don't match what gets installed." Another pause. "I don't know what's true and what isn't, but I've got 17 trucks and I can't afford questions I can't answer. I'm sorry. I genuinely am." "Those things aren't true, Gary." "I believe you mean that," he said carefully. And then he said goodbye. I set the phone on this workbench. I looked at the shop around me, the lift in Bay 1, the toolbox my Uncle Bill had given me when he retired the coffee maker on the shelf above the parts cabinet that I had owned for 14 years and replaced the carafe on twice. 11 years of Belhaven Transport was 40% of my annual revenue. Gone in a 4-minute phone call, and I did not know yet where the lie had started. I spent 3 days calling every contact I had in the Dayton fleet maintenance community quietly, without making accusations, trying to trace the story back to its source. Nobody would tell me directly. But the shape of what I was hearing, the specific language about parts sourcing, the mention of cash invoices, had a particular texture to it. It sounded like someone who understood how small garages operated. It sounded like someone who had sat on my back porch and asked me thoughtful questions about the business over a cup of coffee. I did not let myself finish that thought. Not yet. August arrived, and with it a different kind of loss. Lily stopped answering my calls. Not all at once. It happened the way things erode, gradually, then suddenly. First, she was busy when I called on Sundays. Then she was resting. Then Derek started answering her phone when I called the house line, his voice smooth and apologetic. "Ray, she's had a rough PT session. She really needs quiet today." Or, "She's sleeping, Ray. I'll have her call you when she's up." She never called back. I drove to their house on a Wednesday evening in late August, with a container of Diane's chicken soup and a paperback thriller Lily had mentioned wanting to read. I knocked on the front door. Derek answered in 30 seconds like he had been watching for cars on the street. He was in a collared shirt and khakis, as though he had dressed for something, and his smile arrived exactly on schedule. "Ray." He held the screen door halfway open. "This is a nice surprise." "I brought soup," I said, "and a book for Lily." "That is so thoughtful." He reached through the and took both items from my hands in one smooth motion. She's resting right now, but I will absolutely make sure she gets these. She's going to love that you came by." I looked past his shoulder into the hallway. I could see the edge of the living room, the couch, the lamp, the corner of the television. Nothing moved. "Can I come in for a few minutes?" I asked, just to sit with her. His expression did not change, but something behind it shifted the way a door shifts on its hinges when the wind changes direction. "Ray, honestly, the doctors have been saying she needs to limit stimulation when she's fatigued. Too many visitors sets her back. I'm sure you understand." He looked at me with warm, concerned eyes. "I know it's hard, but I'm looking out for her." I stood on my daughter's front porch, with my hands empty, where the soup and the book had been, and I looked at my son-in-law's face and I said, "Of course, tell her I love her." "I will," he said. "You're a great dad, Ray. She knows that." He closed the door. I stood on the porch for 4 seconds. Then I walked back to my truck and sat behind the wheel and gripped it with both hands until my knuckles ached. Wendy Marsh became my postal service after that. I had stayed in loose contact with her since the accident. She had called twice to check in on Lily's progress, and I had thanked her both times and meant it. When I explained my situation carefully, leaving out more than I put in, she agreed without hesitation. Every week I wrote Lily a note on a note card, nothing long, nothing that would alarm anyone if it was read before it arrived, and I left it in Wendy's mailbox on Birchwood Drive, and Wendy slipped it under Lily's door on her morning walk when Derek's car was gone. I do not know how many of those notes Lily actually received. I wrote 41 of them over the following months. I kept a copy of each one in a folder in my desk at home. That folder is still there. Grandma Ruth took the more direct approach, as she always did. She drove herself to Lily and Derek's house on a Thursday afternoon in September and knocked on the front door. Margaret Ashford answered. She had taken to spending several afternoons a week there, which Diane thought was generous, and I thought was something else entirely. Ruth told me about it that Sunday at dinner, her voice flat and precise the way it gets when she is controlling her reaction to something that made her very angry. "Margaret opened the door and told me Lily was resting," Ruth said, cutting her pot roast into exact thirds. "I told her I was Lily's grandmother, and I had driven 40 minutes, and I would like to see my granddaughter for 10 minutes. Margaret said she understood completely, and that she would let Lily know I had stopped by." Ruth set her knife down. Then she closed the door in my face. The table was quiet. "Did you knock again?" Grace asked. "I am 71 years old," Ruth said, picking up her knife again. "I knocked 4 more times." She looked at me across the table. "Raymond, something is wrong in that house." "I know, Mama," I said. Diane looked between us. "You're both being dramatic. Derek is protective. Lily needs rest. That's not a crime." I looked at my wife's face, open, trusting, certain, and I thought about the distance between what Diane was willing to see and what was actually in front of her. And I understood that someone had been working on that distance deliberately for a long time. "You're probably right," I said. I drove home that night along Birchwood Drive. I did not plan to. I just found myself on it, the same road, the same dark stretch, past the first half-mile where the streetlights ended. I slowed down when I reached the old Mercer mailbox. I stopped the truck. I sat there for a moment with the engine running and the headlights pointing into the dark. I was losing my daughter a second time. The first time someone had taken her body. This time someone was taking everything else: her voice, her access to her family, her mornings on the phone with her father. And I still could not say out loud what I already knew, because knowing something and being able to prove it are two different weights, and I had only ever been carrying one of them. I put the truck in drive and went home. There is a particular kind of sleeplessness that is not about being tired. It is not restlessness, not anxiety in the ordinary sense. It is the sleeplessness of a mind that has been holding a door shut for a long time and has finally run out of the strength to keep it closed. I had been holding that door shut since March of 2021. On a Tuesday night in November of 2022, 20 months after the accident, I lay in bed beside Diane for an hour and then got up quietly and went downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I did not drink and I let the door open. I thought about the Audi in Bay 2, the starred crack in the windshield, the transfer marks on the bumper, that I had read the way I read all damage as a record of exactly what had happened, written in metal and glass. I thought about the spare key, family only, Diane Grace Lilly. No one else. But I had never actually checked Grace's alibi. I had assumed. I had looked at my oldest daughter's red eyes in the hospital waiting room, and I had decided. And I had never gone back to ask the question I should have asked that first night. I thought about why Grace's eyes had been red. Her sister had just been hit by a car. Of course her eyes were red. I put my coffee cup down on the table. My hand was not entirely steady. I thought about Derek, his pressed shirt at the hospital, his knuckles white around his phone. The way he had said, "Who does something like that, Ray?" with his eyes fixed on the floor between his shoes. I thought about what Pastor Glenn had said at the wedding reception. He usually already knows, he just does not want to be right. I thought about the Bellhaven contract and the specific language Gary Phelps had used. Parts sourcing, cash invoices, the vocabulary of a man who had sat on my back porch and listened carefully. I thought about Margaret Ashford standing at Lily's front door, closing it in Grandma Ruth's face. I sat at that kitchen table until 2 in the morning. Then I got up, put on my jacket, and drove to Grace's apartment on Sycamore Street. She answered the door in 30 seconds, which told me she had not been deeply asleep. She was 32 years old, in flannel pajamas, her dark hair pulled back, and the moment she saw my face through the gap in the door, her own face changed. "Dad!" She pulled the door open. "What happened? Is it Lily?" "Lily is fine," I said. "Can I come in?" She stepped back and let me through. Her apartment was warm and smelled like the lavender candles she had burned since college. She sat on the couch and pulled her knees up and watched me sit in the armchair across from her with the particular wary attention of a daughter who knows her father well enough to be frightened by his stillness. "Grace," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. The night before Lily's accident, where were you?" She stared at me. "What? March 13th into the 14th. Where were you that night?" Her face went through 3 expressions in 4 seconds: confusion, then something that looked like hurt, then a careful blankness that told me she was working out what I was actually asking. "Dad, I was at Kara's apartment. We watched movies until midnight, and I slept on her couch. I didn't leave until 8 the next morning. Kara was there the whole time. So was her roommate, Becca." She paused. "Why are you asking me this?" I looked at her, my daughter, 32 years old, sitting on her couch in lavender-scented air at 2 in the morning, looking at her father with eyes that were starting to fill. "Dad," her voice dropped. "Did you think it was me?" I could not answer immediately. The silence between us lasted 8 full seconds, and I counted every one of them. "I made a mistake, Grace," I said. "I am so sorry." She pressed her lips together. 2 tears ran down her face fast, the way tears run when a person has been holding them for a long time without knowing it. "You thought I did it," she said. You thought I hit Lily, and you never. She stopped. How long? Too long, I said. I am sorry. I am genuinely sorry. She pulled a throw blanket over her knees and looked at the far wall for a moment. Then she looked back at me. If you didn't think it was me, she said slowly, then who did you think it was? I don't know yet, I said, but I'm going to find out. She studied my face. Grace has always been able to read me better than anyone except Ruth, and what she read in my face at that moment made her pull the blanket tighter and say very quietly, Dad, be careful. I drove home through the empty Dayton streets with the heat on full and my thoughts moving fast and certain for the first time in 20 months. When I got back to the house, I went directly to my desk in the small room off the kitchen that I use as an office. I opened the bottom drawer and took out a manila folder, clean unused, the kind I keep in a box for work orders. I wrote on the tab in block letters with a black marker. LH, March 14th. Inside. I put 3 things. The cold case file number from my notebook, copied onto a clean sheet of paper. A list of every anomaly I could recall: the spare key, the Audi's condition, Derek at the hospital in a pressed shirt 20 minutes after a call that had not yet been made to him publicly, the Bellhaven rumors and their specific vocabulary. And a question written at the bottom of the page in the same block letters. Who had the spare key that night? I put the folder in the small fireproof safe I keep in the office closet behind a box of old tax returns. I set the combination and closed it and stood in front of it for a moment, with my hand on the door. I did not have a theory. I did not have a suspect I was willing to name even to myself. What I had was the particular feeling that 12 years of diagnosing engines by sound and smell had given me, the feeling that something was wrong in a way that was not random, in a way that had a source, and that finding the source was a matter of patience and the right tools, and not flinching when the answer turned out to be worse than you expected. I went back to bed at 3:15. Diane was still asleep. I lay beside her in the dark, and I looked at the ceiling, and I thought about the wedding photo on the mantelpiece downstairs. Derek and Lily at the altar. His hand over hers, his smile wide and aimed at the camera. I had been looking at that smile for 2 years and telling myself I was a difficult father who could not let his daughter be happy. I was not going to tell myself that anymore. In January of 2023, I was replacing a GPS navigation module on a 2019 Chevy Silverado for a regular customer named Doug Hester. Doug was a contractor who put 200 miles a day on his truck and replaced parts the way most people replace batteries, frequently and without sentiment. The old module came out clean. I set it on my workbench while I fitted the new unit, and on a reflex born from 28 years of mechanical habit, I powered up the old module to confirm it was fully dead before I tossed it in the parts bin. It was not fully dead. The screen came up gray and then resolved into a map display, and the location history was still loaded: 63 trip records going back 11 months. Every address Doug had visited laid out in a scrollable list with timestamps. I stood at my workbench, looking at that screen for a long moment. Then I set the module down carefully, finished Doug's truck, sent him on his way, and locked the garage an hour early. I sat at my workbench alone, and I thought about what I knew about the Audi Q5 that Derek Ashford drove. A 2020 Audi Q5 stores location data in 2 places. The first is the onboard navigation system, the screen on the dashboard that most people interact with. Derek would have cleared that. Any reasonably careful person would clear that first. But the second location is the telematics module, a separate computer roughly the size of a paperback book bolted behind the dashboard that communicates with the manufacturer's servers and the vehicle's insurance carrier for purposes of roadside assistance, warranty tracking, and accident response. That module logs every trip independently of the navigation screen. Clearing the dashboard display does not touch it. I had pulled telematics modules before. I knew where they sat in an Audi chassis. I also knew I no longer had access to Derek's vehicle, and that the module in his current Audi, which he had replaced the original Q5 with in late 2021, I had seen the new one in his driveway at Thanksgiving, would not carry the data I needed. But the original Q5 had been repaired at Pete Grover's shop and returned to Derek 3 days later. Derek had driven it for 7 more months before trading it in. Somewhere in that chain, the telematics module had continued logging, and the data from that module, if it had ever been submitted to Derek's insurance carrier for any purpose, would exist on a server I could not access myself. I needed someone who could. His name was Boyd Kellerman. We had gone to Kettering High together in 1982, lost touch for 15 years, and reconnected at a class reunion in 2004. Boyd had spent 30 years in automotive insurance claims, most recently as a senior adjuster for a regional carrier in Columbus. We met for lunch at a diner in Xenia on a Thursday in early January. I told him what I needed without telling him why, which is a conversation that works better with people who trust you completely and ask questions professionally rather than personally. Boyd was that kind of person. "What you're describing," Boyd said, cutting his grilled cheese into triangles the way he had done since we were 17, "is a telematics pull on a vehicle that's been traded in and resold. The module data gets archived by the carrier if there was ever a claim associated with that VN." He looked at me over his coffee. "Was there a claim?" "There was a claim filed and then withdrawn within 24 hours, I said. "March of 2021. Boyd set his coffee cup down. He looked at me steadily. "Ray." "Boyd." He picked up his coffee. "I'll make some calls," he said. Quietly. "Don't thank me yet." 3 weeks later, Boyd drove to my garage after closing and handed me a single printed page in an envelope. He did not stay. He shook my hand at the door, said, "Take care of yourself, Ray," and drove back to Columbus. I sat at my workbench and unfolded the page. It was a telematics location record, 4 lines of data. The third line read, "Vehicle located at coordinates 39.7412 DG, N 84.11 sign 38 DG, W at 0502 AM on 03/14/2021. Duration at location 4 minutes 11 seconds. Those coordinates, when I looked them up on my phone, placed Derek Ashford's white Audi Q5 at the intersection of Birchwood Drive and Crestwood Avenue at 5 o'clock in the morning on the day my daughter was found on that road. I sat with that page for a long time. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. I had expected them to shake. Instead, I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for nearly 2 years. Not relief, exactly, not satisfaction, but the specific quiet of a man who has been asking a question in the dark and has just heard an answer in a voice he recognizes. I put the page in the folder in the safe. I added Boyd's name to my contact list with a note beside it, "Helped, no questions." Then I drove to Dayton General for an unrelated reason. Diane had a follow-up appointment for a knee issue and had asked me to pick her up. I parked in the lot on the north side and was walking toward the main entrance when a woman in a white coat came through the automatic doors, moving quickly, a tablet under one arm and a travel coffee mug in the other hand. She stopped when she saw me. "Mr. Holloway." Her voice was careful, the voice of someone choosing words in real time. "I thought that was you." Dr. Patricia Owens was Lily's physiatrist, a specialist in physical medicine and rehabilitation, who had been overseeing Lily's recovery plan since the previous spring. I had met her once briefly in a hospital corridor when Lily was still inpatient. She was in her late 40s, trim, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses hanging from her coat pocket. She had the direct eyes of a doctor who had long ago decided that her patients deserved honesty more than comfort. She glanced toward the entrance, then back at me, and something in her expression shifted from careful to decided. "I can't discuss your daughter's medical file with you, Mr. Holloway," she said. "That's not something I'm able to do outside of an authorized appointment." She paused. "But I can tell you in general terms that a patient's recovery trajectory can sometimes be affected by factors outside the clinical setting." Another pause, longer this time. Missed appointments, for example. Canceled sessions. Particularly when the cancellations are called in by someone other than the patient. I looked at her. "How many?" She held my gaze. "That's a specific question about a specific file," she said carefully. "What I can tell you generally is that consistent interruption of a physical rehabilitation schedule can extend recovery by months, sometimes significantly." She shifted her tablet under her arm. "I'm glad I ran into you, Mr. Holloway. I hope your wife's appointment goes well." She walked past me toward the parking structure. I stood outside the automatic doors and watched her go, and felt a cold clarity move through me that had nothing to do with the January air. Derek had been canceling Lily's appointments. Not all of them enough to post about the ones he attended. But someone had been calling the rehabilitation center and removing sessions from Lily's schedule, and that someone was not Lily, and what Dr. Owens had just told me without telling me anything at all was that my daughter's recovery had been deliberately slowed by the man who was supposed to be helping her heal. I drove home after I picked up Diane. She talked about her knee for most of the drive, and I listened and answered at the right moments, and kept both hands on the wheel and my face pointed forward. I had a printed page that put Derek's car on Birchwood Drive at 5 in the morning. I had a doctor who had just told me in the careful language of a professional protecting herself that someone was making sure Lily did not get better. All I needed now was a voice. The text message came on a Wednesday evening in late November of 2023. I was closing up the garage, running the end-of-day checklist, the way I have done for 28 years: lights off in Bay 2, compressor bled floor, drain clear, side door locked. My phone buzzed on the workbench. Unknown number. The message was 11 words long. "You should ask Nate Caldwell what he heard at O'Brien's bar last Thursday." I read it twice. I set the phone face up on the workbench and looked at it for a moment. Then I finished my checklist, locked the garage, and went home. I did not reply to the message. Whoever had sent it had chosen not to identify themselves, and I respected that choice enough not to push against it. What I did instead was look up Nate Caldwell. I was not difficult to find. Dayton is not a small city, but it is not a large one either, and Derek Ashford was not a man who kept his social life private. Nate Caldwell appeared in 3 years of Derek's social media photographs, barbecues, football watch parties, a fishing trip to Lake Erie in the summer of 2022. He was 34, broad-faced, with an easy grin, and the kind of build that suggested he had played linebacker in high school and not entirely moved on from it. He worked in logistics for a warehouse distribution company on the east side of Dayton. He and Derek had been friends since college. I called him on a Thursday morning and told him my name. There was a silence on his end that lasted long enough to tell me he knew exactly who I was. "Mr. Holloway," he said. His voice was careful and low. "I've been thinking about calling you for a while." "I know," I said. "Can we meet somewhere quiet?" We met at a diner on Linden Avenue, not O'Brien's, which was Derek's territory, but a breakfast place that opened at 6 and had booths with high backs that gave you privacy without asking for it. Nate was already there when I arrived, a coffee in front of him that he had not touched. He stood up when he saw me, which I had not expected, and shook my hand with both of his. We sat down across from each other. He looked like a man who had been carrying something in his coat pocket for a long time and was not sure whether to put it on the table. "How long have you known?" I asked him. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Since August," he said. 5 months. "Tell me what happened." He took a breath. "We were at O'Brien's on a Thursday night. Derek had been drinking since before I got there. He gets like that sometimes, comes in already halfway gone, and you just kind of manage the evening from there. Around 11, he started talking about Lily, about how hard things had been, about how he never got credit for what he'd given up." Nate's jaw tightened. And then he said something that I thought I'd misheard. "What did he say?" Nate looked at the table. "He said, 'I think about that morning every single day, Nate. I didn't even see her until it was too late. And then I just kept driving.'" He looked up at me. He was crying when he said it. The ugly kind of crying where you can't control it. He said, "My mom told me to keep driving. She said if I stopped, everything was over. The wedding, the career, everything." The booth was quiet around us. Someone at the counter ordered eggs over easy. The cook called it back. Normal sounds in a normal morning. "You recorded it," I said. Nate nodded. "I had my phone on the table with the voice memo running because he was too drunk to drive home, and I was going to play it back for him in the morning to convince him to call a car service. I do that sometimes when he gets bad. I wasn't trying to—" He stopped. "I didn't mean to record that part, but once I heard it back the next morning, I couldn't unhear it. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I was quiet for a moment. His hands tightened around the cup. "Because Derek is my friend," he said. "And because he did something unforgivable, and those two things are both true at the same time, and I didn't know what to do with that." He looked at me directly for the first time since we sat down. "And because he owes me $11,000 from a loan I gave him in 2021. And I was scared of what happened if I lost that too." He said it flatly, without apology, the way honest people admit things that don't reflect well on them. "I'm not proud of that last part. I'm not here to judge you, Nate," I said. "I'm here for my daughter." He reached into his jacket pocket and set a small digital recorder on the table between us, the kind that clips to a shirt pocket small enough to disappear in a hand. He pushed it across the table toward me. "The recording is 47 seconds, he said. His voice is clear. It was a quiet night and he was talking right at the table. He paused. "I made a copy. If anything happens to that one, call me." I picked up the recorder. It was lighter than I expected. I turned it over in my hand once and set it in my shirt pocket, in the same place I had carried the notebook with the cold case number for the past 2 years. I need to explain something about Ohio law because it matters. Ohio is what lawyers call a one-party consent state. That means a recording of a conversation is legal as long as at least one person participating in the conversation knows it is being recorded. Nate had been present in the conversation. Nate had been the one recording. Under Ohio Revised Code Section 2933.52, that recording was obtained legally and could be used as evidence in a civil or criminal proceeding without either Derek's knowledge or his consent. I had looked this up 3 weeks earlier when the anonymous text first arrived, because I had understood even then what I was hoping to find. We sat for another few minutes. Nate drank his coffee. I drank mine. He asked me what I was going to do, and I told him I did not know yet, which was partially true. He asked me if Derek was going to find out. It was him, and I told him I could not promise anything, but that I intended to give him as much protection as the situation allowed. He nodded. He looked tired in the way of someone who has been sleeping badly for 5 months and knows exactly why. I liked Lily. I genuinely liked her. She used to come to the watch parties sometimes before the accident, and she had this way of— He stopped. His throat moved. She deserves better than what she got. Yes, I said. She does. I drove back to the garage in the January cold, with the recorder in my shirt pocket and my hands steady on the wheel. I parked inside, locked the bay door, and sat at my workbench. I pressed play. Derek's voice came through the small speaker, blurred at the edges with alcohol and something that might have been grief or might have been the performance of grief. I had stopped being able to tell the difference a long time ago. The 47 seconds played through once. I sat still. Then I pressed play again. And a third time. On the third, listen, I noticed something I had missed the first 2 times. Underneath Derek's voice in the half-second gap before he said, I just kept driving, there was a sound. Small. Involuntary. The sound a person makes when they are about to say something they have never said out loud before, and the body resists it even as the mouth opens. I turned off the recorder. I sat in my garage with the folder in the safe behind me and the recorder in my pocket, and 2 years and 9 months of patience pressing down on my shoulders, like something that was finally about to be set down. I had the location. I had the repair record. I had the voice. Now I needed a room. Grace called me at 2:17 in the morning on a Thursday in February of 2024. I was asleep, which had become a relative term in the past 3 years. The kind of sleep where one layer of your mind stays close to the surface, listening for something it cannot name. The phone rang once, and I had it in my hand before the second ring finished. Beside me, Diane stirred but did not wake. Grace was crying before I said a word, not the controlled kind of crying that asks for help in an organized way. The loose, gasping kind that means a person has been holding something for a long time, and the container has finally split open. Dad. Her voice came through broken and wet. Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you say anything. I'm here, I said. I was already sitting up, feet on the floor, moving toward the hallway so Diane would not hear. I'm listening, Grace. Take a breath. She took 3. I counted them with her the way I had counted her breaths when she was 7 years old and had woken from a nightmare about a dog she had seen get hit by a car on our street. Some things a father's body remembers independent of time. Someone told Aunt Carol, she said. And Aunt Carol told Uncle Mike, and Uncle Mike told Diane's whole side at Christmas, and now everyone thinks— She stopped. Another breath. They're saying you know what happened to Lily. They're saying you've been hiding it. They're saying I was the one driving, and you covered it up to protect me, and that's why you paid cash somewhere and— Her voice collapsed into something that was not quite words. I sat down on the hallway floor with my back against the wall. The baseboard heater ticked beside me. The house was cold and dark and very still. Grace, I said, look at me. You're not here, Dad. I know. Look at me anyway. Are you looking? A pause. Yes. None of that is true. You know it is not true. You were at Kara's apartment. You have never been anything but my daughter, and I have never for one single day believed you did anything wrong. I paused. Do you hear me? She made a sound that was not quite yes and not quite no. Then she said, But you did think it was me. In the beginning. You said so back in November of 2022. You said you made a mistake. I did, I said. And I was wrong, and I have carried that for over a year, and I am sorry. I am genuinely sorry, Grace. The hallway was quiet for a long moment. I could hear her breathing stabilize slowly, the way a person's breathing stabilizes when they are deciding whether to let something go or hold on to it longer. "Who is telling people this, Dad?" she asked. Her voice had shifted. The crying was not gone, but something harder had moved underneath it, the way bedrock feels under loose soil. "Who started it?" I thought about Margaret Ashford in her cream-colored dress at the wedding reception, her hand touching Diane's arm twice, her eyes moving around the room like someone taking inventory. I thought about the specific architecture of the rumors, the cash payment, the body shop, the covered-up vehicle. Details that pointed straight at me. Details that someone had shaped carefully and released into the right ears at the right time. "I think I know," I said. "Is it Margaret?" I did not answer. The silence was its own answer, and Grace was 32 years old, and not someone who needed things spelled out for her. "Dad." Her voice was very quiet now. "What is actually going on, and don't tell me you don't know. You've had that look since before the wedding." I sat on the hallway floor for a moment. The baseboard heater ticked. The street outside was silent. I thought about how much to say, and decided that Grace had already been paying the price for my silence, and had not even known what she was paying for. "I am going to fix this," I said. "I cannot tell you everything yet, but I need you to trust me for a little while longer. Can you do that?" A long pause. "How much longer?" "Not long," I said. "I promise." She breathed out slowly. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Dad, but I need you to know something." Her voice steadied and became very clear, the way her voice gets when she has made a decision. "Whatever this is, whatever you've been carrying, you should not have carried it alone. You should have told me." "I know," I said. "You're right." "I'm always right," she said. "You taught me that." It surprised a sound out of me that was almost a laugh, the first one in longer than I could remember. "Go to sleep, Grace," I said. "I'll call you tomorrow." I stayed on the hallway floor for a few minutes after we hung up. Then I went downstairs, made a cup of coffee I did not drink, and sat at the kitchen table the way I had sat on the night in November of 2022, when I had first let the door open. The next morning I called Dr. Sandra Mercer, a licensed clinical psychologist, whose name Pastor Glenn had given me the previous year, when Grace's anxiety had been spiking, and I had mentioned it quietly to him after Sunday service. Dr. Mercer had an office on Brown Street, 10 minutes from Grace's apartment. I called her at 8 in the morning and explained the situation in careful general terms and asked if she could see Grace on short notice. She could. I paid the first 4 sessions from the savings account I kept separate from the garage operating fund, the one I had been adding to since Lily was born, $20 a week, for 27 years, for whatever my daughters needed that I could not anticipate. This was something I had not anticipated. It was also exactly what the account was for. Grace saw Dr. Mercer on a Tuesday and called me afterward. She did not tell me what they had talked about, and I did not ask. She said it helped Dad, and that was enough. Margaret's campaign, as I had come to think of it, continued through March. The Whisper network that had started with Aunt Carol spread outward through Diane's extended family, with the patient efficiency of something that had been designed rather than grown. By April, I was arriving at family gatherings to find conversations that stopped at the wrong moment. Chairs subtly arranged so that mine was slightly outside the main circle. Questions about the garage asked with an undertone of concern that was not concern at all. Diane noticed none of it, or noticed, and chose not to see, which had become a distinction I could no longer tell apart. Pastor Glenn noticed. He showed up at my garage on a Monday morning in March with 2 cups of coffee from the place on 5th that he knew I liked and set one on my workbench without announcing himself. He did this every Monday. He had been doing it since August of the previous year, which was when he had understood, I think, that I needed a witness more than I needed advice. He sat on the stool across from me and drank his coffee and looked at the socket set on the wall and said, "How are you holding up, Ray?" "I've got everything I need," I said. "I just need the right moment." He turned his cup in his hands. "You know," he said, "in 31 years of ministry, the hardest thing I have ever watched good people do is wait. Not because they are not patient, but because while they wait, the thing they are waiting to fix keeps costing them." He looked at me. "Make sure what you're waiting for is worth what you're spending." I thought about Grace on the hallway floor at 2 in the morning. I thought about 41 note cards in Wendy Marsh's mailbox. I thought about the recorder in my shirt pocket, and the folder in the safe, and the printed GPS page with Derek Ashford's Audi placed on Birchwood Drive at 5 in the morning. "It is," I said. Pastor Glenn nodded once and finished his coffee. He set the empty cup on the workbench and stood up and put his hand briefly on my shoulder, the way men of a certain age and faith put a hand on a shoulder when they have nothing left to add and want you to know they are still there. He walked out into the March morning. I watched him go. Then I turned back to the truck I was working on and picked up my wrench and got back to work. By the end of March, I had everything I needed inside that safe. What I did not have yet was a room with the right people in it. That room, as it turned out, was going to be given to me by the last person I would have chosen to trust with anything. On a Saturday afternoon in late March of 2024, I spread everything across my workbench. A photograph of Derek's white Audi Q5 pulled from the voided insurance claim Derek had filed and canceled within 24 hours of the accident. The cracked windshield and creased bumper visible in the upper right corner, and the digital recorder with Nate Caldwell's 47 seconds, 4 items, 3 years, 1 workbench. I was looking at them when the side door opened. Tommy Holloway was 19 years old, my brother Dennis's youngest, and he had been coming to this garage since he was 6. He knew where I kept the spare key on the same hook inside the door where it had always been, and he used it the way people use keys to places where they have always been welcome. He stopped inside the door when he saw the papers spread across the bench. "Uncle Ray." He looked at the documents, then at me. "What is all that?" Tommy was a lean kid with his father's ears, and my Uncle Bill's hands, wide palms, thick fingers built for mechanical work. He had been helping me on weekend jobs since he was 15. He was not the sharpest student in any classroom he had ever sat in. But he understood engines, he understood loyalty, and he had never in his life had a single conversation with anyone named Ashford. Those 3 things made him exactly who I needed. I pulled up the second stool and said, "Sit down, Tommy. I need to tell you something." I told him everything. Not the summarized version, not the careful version, all of it from the Audi in Bay 2 on the night of March 14th to the recorder in my shirt pocket. I talked for 22 minutes. Tommy did not interrupt once. He sat on the stool with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on my face, and he listened the way young people listen when the world has just become larger and more serious than they knew it was. When I finished, the garage was quiet. Outside, a car passed on Kelsey Avenue. A dog barked twice somewhere down the block. Tommy looked at the workbench. He looked at the recorder. He looked back at me. "Uncle Ray," he said. His voice was careful and low and older than 19. "Who else knows? Grandma Ruth suspects. Pastor Glenn knows enough. Nobody else." He nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" Those 7 words. I had been waiting for someone to ask me that for 3 years, and when they finally came, they came from a 19-year-old boy sitting on a garage stool on a Saturday afternoon, and I had to look at the far wall for a moment before I could answer him. "There's going to be a gathering," I said. "Family. I need someone who can be in the room early, someone who can set up a way to show what's on that recorder and those pages to everyone at once, quietly, before anyone arrives." Tommy thought about it. "Like a projector setup, screen, and speakers. Something like that. I can do that." He said it the way he said he could replace a water pump matter-of-factly, without drama, because it was simply a problem with a solution, and he had the tools. When, "I don't know yet, but soon," he stood up and looked at the documents one more time. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were wet, though he would not have wanted me to notice that, so I did not. He picked up the recorder carefully, turned it over, once the way I had turned it over, when Nate first handed it to me, and set it back down. "She deserves better than what happened to her," he said. "Yes," I said. "She does." He left 10 minutes later. I called Detective Hansen that evening and asked about the procedure for submitting supplementary evidence to a cold case file. Hansen remembered me immediately. He told me to bring whatever I had to the station, and he would log it formally into the case record. He said carefully that logging evidence did not automatically reopen an investigation. That decision required review. I told him I understood. I was not calling to reopen an investigation. I was calling to make sure that what I had found would exist on record permanently, in a place that no one could reach into and remove. I put the 4 items back into the folder. I put the folder back in the safe. I set the combination and stood in front of it with my hand on the cold metal door. Margaret Ashford had given me 3 years of silence. She was about to give me something far more useful. Diane called me on a Tuesday morning in early May, while I was bleeding the brake lines on a customer's Silverado. I almost did not answer. Then I saw her name on the screen and wiped my hands on a shop rag and picked up. "Raymond." Her voice had the particular brightness she uses when she has decided something is going to be a good thing and wants to establish that early. "Margaret and I have been talking. We want to do something for Lily. A family dinner to celebrate how far she has come. 3 years since the accident. We thought the 17th. Saturday evening, 7 o'clock. At our place." I set the rag down on the workbench. Outside, a truck turned onto Kelsey Avenue and its engine faded down the block. "Who suggested it?" I asked. A small pause. "Margaret, actually. She thought it would mean a lot to Lily, to have everyone together." Another pause, softer. "Ray, I know things have been strained, but Lily needs her family around her. Both sides." I held the phone and looked at the far wall of my garage where the socket set hung in order of size. I thought about Tommy's hands on the recorder 3 weeks earlier. I thought about the folder in the safe behind me. "I'll be there," I said. 7 o'clock. Diane exhaled. "Thank you, Raymond. That means a lot." I set the phone down. I stood at my workbench for a long moment. Then I called Tommy. He answered on the second ring. I told him we had a date. Saturday, May 17th. Our house on Carver Street. He needed to be there by 6 before any guests arrived under the cover of helping set up. Grandma Ruth would handle that. She had a standing invitation to every family gathering and never needed a reason to arrive early. "What kind of space are we working with?" Tommy asked. "Dining room. Opens into the living room. Maybe 40 feet across total. Ceiling-mounted light fixture in the center." "I can work with that," he said. "I'll need 30 minutes. You'll have 45. Even better." A pause. "Uncle Ray, is this it?" "Yes," I said. "This is it." The week moved slowly, the way weeks move when you are waiting for something you have been preparing for a long time. I serviced 3 vehicles. I had coffee with Pastor Glenn on Monday morning and told him about the dinner, and he said he would be there. Diane had already called him, which did not surprise me. Pastor Glenn had been present at every significant moment in our family for 11 years. It seemed right that he would be present for this one, too. I called Grandma Ruth on Wednesday evening. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she had been expecting me. "Saturday," I said. "I know," she said. "Diane called me Monday. I already told her I would bring the potato salad and arrive at 6 to help set up." "I need you to do something for me when you get there," I said. "I know that too, Raymond." Her voice was dry and certain, the voice of a woman who had been reading situations correctly for 7 decades. "I will make sure that young man gets into that dining room before anyone else arrives. You have my word." I did not need to explain further. That is the thing about Grandma Ruth. On the evening of May 16th, the night before, I laid my suit across the chair beside the bed the way I had laid it out for the wedding 2 years earlier. The charcoal gray 2-button, the white shirt. The plain dark tie Diane had bought me for her father's retirement dinner in 2019. I set my dress shoes on the floor beneath the chair. I checked my phone. I checked the safe in the office. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, with my hands on my knees. Diane came to the doorway. She looked at the suit on the chair and then at me. "You nervous?" she asked. "No," I said. That was the truth. I had moved past nervous a long time ago, somewhere between the GPS record and the 47 seconds. "Good," she smiled. "It's just dinner, Raymond." "Yes," I said. "It is." She went back to the bathroom. I looked at the suit on the chair. I thought about the first time I had worn it, my father-in-law's funeral, 2009, standing at a graveside in February, with cold rain on my shoulders and Diane's hand in mine. I thought about everything that suit had witnessed since. I thought about what it was going to witness tomorrow. I turned off the bedside lamp. I lay back. I stared at the ceiling in the dark for a long time. The next morning I was up at 5. I made coffee. I drank it standing at the kitchen window, the way I had stood on the morning of March 14th, 2021. Watching the sky above the rooftops shift from black to dark blue. The same window, the same light. A different morning entirely. At 5:30 my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Tommy. 4 words, "Ready when you are." I set my coffee cup in the sink. I went upstairs and put on the suit. The house smelled like white lilies when I walked through the front door at 6:55. Diane orders white lilies for 3 occasions only: Christmas anniversaries and funerals. I stood in the foyer and breathed that smell and understood, before I had taken my coat off, that whatever this evening was supposed to look like on the surface, something underneath it had already been decided by someone other than my wife. The dining room had been opened into the living room. The long oak table seated 12 extended with a folding section at the end to fit 6 more. 18 chairs, white tablecloth, cloth napkins folded into points, Diane's good china that came out 4 times a year. At the center of the table, a low arrangement of white lilies in a glass vase caught the light from the overhead fixture and scattered it across the ceiling in small, pale fragments. Tommy was in the corner near the window, adjusting something behind the curtain panel. He caught my eye once and gave a small nod. Then he went back to being 19 years old, helping set up for a family dinner, which is exactly what he looked like to everyone else in the room. Grandma Ruth found me at the entrance to the dining room. She pressed my hand between both of hers without saying anything, which told me everything I needed to know about what she was thinking. Then she went to her chair at the head of the table and sat down with the composed certainty of a woman who had decided exactly how this evening was going to go. Guests arrived between 7 and 7:15. Diane's sister Carol and her husband Mike. 3 cousins from Diane's side. Pastor Glenn, who shook my hand at the door and held it an extra beat. And Derek and Margaret arriving together in the white Audi, the new one, the 2022, which I had seen exactly twice before tonight. Margaret was in a navy dress, her silver hair perfect. She embraced Diane at the door with both arms and said something that made Diane laugh. Then she turned to me with a warm smile and extended her hand. "Raymond," she said, I'm so glad you came." "Margaret," I said. I shook her hand. Her grip was firm and dry and lasted exactly the right amount of time. Derek came in behind her. He had a bottle of wine in each hand, and the easy smile that I had been watching for 3 years, and still could not entirely read. He set the bottles on the sideboard and clapped me on the shoulder. "Ray." His voice was warm. "Good to see you, man. Glad you're here." "Good to be here," I said. Lily arrived at 7:10, Derek having picked her up from their house. She came through the door with her cane. She had graduated from the walker to a single aluminum cane 2 months earlier, which Dr. Owens had told me was ahead of the revised schedule, and the room moved toward her, the way rooms move toward the person everyone has been waiting for. She looked better than I had seen her in months. Her color was good. Her eyes were bright. She found me across the room and crossed to me, directly ignoring the others, until she had reached me, and when she hugged me, she held on for a long moment, with her face against my shoulder. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly. "Hi, baby girl," I said. I held on to her for 3 seconds longer than I normally would have. She did not pull away. Dinner began at 7:30. Derek poured wine. I watched him pour his own first glass, then a second before the soup course was cleared. Margaret sat at the far end of the table from Grandma Ruth, which I noted because it meant neither woman had to look directly at the other all evening. Pastor Glenn sat to my left. He unfolded his napkin, placed it in his lap, and murmured, "How are you holding up, Ray?" "Ready," I said. He picked up his water glass. "Then let us hope the evening cooperates." It was 8:11 when I noticed the shift. Derek had finished his 4th glass. Margaret had been carrying most of the table conversation for 30 minutes. Stories about Lily's resilience, her courage, how far she had come, and the room had been nodding and agreeing, building warmth the way a room does when it thinks it has been given permission to feel good. I had been watching Margaret's eyes rather than listening to her words, and at 8:11 she set her wineglass down on the tablecloth with a small, deliberate sound and looked across at Derek. He nodded once. I had seen that exchange before. In the corner of a hospital waiting room 3 years ago, in the parking lot of a rehabilitation center, on the dance floor of St. Andrew's Lutheran. Always the same, her eyes finding his. The small confirmation, the decision already made before the room knew there was a decision. I put both hands flat on the tablecloth. Under the table, my feet were square on the floor. Whatever was coming had already left the station. Before I reveal how this confrontation plays out, type "still here" or comment 100 below. I know you're writing this out with me. And a quick heads up, the story following this point contains dramatic fictionalized elements that may not reflect standard reality. If you prefer strictly factual content, feel free to pause or step away right here. Margaret stood up at 8:12. She pushed her chair back smoothly, the way a person stands when they have rehearsed the moment, and she raised her wine glass toward the table. The conversation died the way conversation dies when someone signals they are about to speak immediately, completely, all at once. "I want to say something," she said. Her voice was warm and carrying, and pitched to reach every corner of the room. 3 years ago, this family went through something that would have broken most people. And yet here we are, together. Because of one person's extraordinary strength. She looked at Lily. My daughter-in-law. My girl. The table made the soft, approving sound rooms make when they believe what they are hearing. Diane pressed her hand to her chest. Pastor Glenn's expression was careful and still. Grandma Ruth watched Margaret the way she had watched her at the wedding, without expression, without movement, the way a person watches something they have already correctly identified. Margaret's voice dropped a register. You know, 3 years is a long time to watch someone struggle. She tilted her head toward Lily, with the particular sympathy of a woman performing sympathy for an audience. One has to wonder, when does the struggle end? When does a person decide to stop needing so much from everyone around them? The warmth in the room shifted. Not disappeared, shifted. The way temperature shifts when a cloud moves across the sun. Lily's hand tightened on her cane. Derek stood up, then his chair scraping back hard. He had been drinking since before 7, and his movements had the loose, slightly too large quality of a man whose judgment had been replaced by something uglier. He walked around the table toward Lily with Margaret. 2 steps behind him, and I watched them cross that distance the way I had watched the damaged Audi in Bay 2, reading every detail, already knowing what I was seeing. Derek reached Lily's chair. He looked down at her cane where it leaned against the table edge. Then he grabbed it with his right hand and wrenched it sideways and threw it across the room. It struck the far wall with a sharp crack and clattered to the floor. Lily's weight went with it. She dropped sideways from her chair and hit the hardwood floor on her left side, and the sound of that, her body hitting that floor, went through me like something physical. Margaret looked down at her. You are not disabled, she said, her voice flat and carrying, and aimed at the whole room. You are a burden who loves the attention. Stop the act. Get up. The room was stunned for 2 seconds. Then someone laughed, one of Diane's cousins, a short, shocked sound that had no understanding behind it. Another person joined. Not everyone, but enough. I heard my daughter's breath come out hard against the floor. I saw her left hand press flat against the hardwood, trying to push herself up and her arm shaking with the effort. I stood up. I did not move quickly. I did not raise my voice. I pushed my chair back from the table, and I stood to my full height, and I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone, and I looked across the table at Derek Ashford. The room watched me. I could feel it, 18 people pulling their attention away from Lily on the floor and toward the mechanic from Kelsey Avenue in the charcoal suit, who was standing very still with a phone in his hand. Derek looked back at me. His jaw was set, and his eyes were bright with wine and something that might have been triumph. I spoke at the volume I used to say good morning to a customer. 5 words. Nothing more. Derek, I found the Audi. The laughter stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The way a power line stops when it is cut, immediate total, the absence arriving before the mind registers that something has changed. Margaret's wineglass slipped in her fingers. She caught it, but barely. Derek's expression did not shift slowly. It did not drain or fade or crumble in stages. It stopped the way a clock stops when the battery dies, one moment fully running, the next moment simply over. His mouth stayed in the shape of the smile he had been wearing, but the smile itself was gone, and what remained was just the shape of one. Grandma Ruth was already moving. She crossed the room with the steady, unhurried purpose of a woman who had been waiting for this moment longer than anyone else in the family. And she knelt on the hardwood floor beside Lily and took her granddaughter's face in both hands. "I've got you, sweetheart," she said. "I've got you. Tommy pressed the button from his corner of the room. The small projector behind the curtain panel came on without sound, just a rectangle of white light that appeared on the dining room wall above the sideboard, bright and clean and impossible to look away from. 18 people turned toward it the way people turn toward any sudden light in a dark place by instinct, before the mind has decided whether to look. Derek took one step backward. His heel caught the leg of his chair, and he grabbed the chair back to steady himself. Margaret's hand found the edge of the table. The first image appeared. I spoke before anyone else could. "This is a telematics location record," I said. My voice was level and unhurried, the voice I use when I am explaining to a customer exactly what is wrong with their vehicle and why. A telematics module is a separate computer inside every modern vehicle that logs location data independently of the dashboard navigation system. It communicates with the manufacturer and the insurance carrier. Clearing the dashboard screen does not clear this module. I paused. Derek cleared his dashboard. He did not know about the module. On the wall, the printed page from Boyd's envelope was clearly visible. 4 lines of data. The third line enlarged to fill the center of the projection. Vehicle located at coordinates 39.7422, N 84.1938, W at 0502 AM on 03/14/2021. Duration at location 4 minutes 11 seconds. Those coordinates, I said, are the intersection of Birchwood Drive and Crestwood Avenue. March 14, 2021, 5:02 in the morning. The room was so quiet, I could hear the projector's small fan turning. Diane said very softly, "Raymond." I did not look at her yet. I kept my eyes on Derek. He had not moved from his position behind his chair. His hands were white on the chair back, and his face had taken on the specific stillness of a man whose mind is moving very fast in a space that has just become very small. The second image replaced the first. Pete Grover's receipt from Springfield, Illinois. The handwriting at the bottom enlarged. "This is a repair receipt from Grover's Auto Reconditioning in Springfield, Illinois," I said. "Dated March 15, 2021, the day after the accident. $4,350 paid in cash. The repairs listed are front windshield replacement, front bumper realignment, and repaint and front fascia refinishing." I let that sit for a moment. Those are the exact repairs required to restore a vehicle that had struck a person at speed on a residential road. Margaret straightened. "That proves nothing about Derek," she said. Her voice was controlled but thin at the edges, the way a rope sounds when it has been pulled too tight for too long. "You could have had any vehicle repaired there." "You're right," I said, "which is why there's a second page." The third image. The insurance photograph. The Audi's cracked windshield and creased bumper, the timestamp in the corner. March 14, 2021, 11:19 in the morning. The watermark of Derek's insurance carrier visible in the lower right. Derek filed a deer strike claim with his auto insurance the morning after the accident, I said. He canceled it within 24 hours when the local news reported that a runner had been found on Birchwood Drive. The photographs stayed in the carrier's system. A contact in automotive insurance retrieved it through standard claims archive procedures. I looked at Margaret directly. "It is Derek's vehicle. It is Derek's policy number. And it was photographed 9 hours after my daughter was found on that road." Margaret's mouth opened. She closed it. At the table, Diane's cousin Carol had both hands pressed flat on the tablecloth in front of her. Pastor Glenn sat very still with his hands folded and his eyes on Derek. Grandma Ruth remained on the floor beside Lily, one hand on Lily's shoulder, her gaze moving steadily between Derek and Margaret, with the patient attention of someone who has waited a very long time for a room to catch up to to what she already knew. The fourth image was just a waveform, a gray audio spectrum on a white background, the kind of visual a voice recorder application displays when it is playing back a file. Tommy pressed play. Derek's voice came through the small portable speaker clearly the way Nate had promised it would. 47 seconds, recorded at close range in a quiet bar on a Thursday night. The words were slightly blurred at the edges with alcohol, but fully intelligible. Every word. I think about that morning every single day, Nate. I didn't even see her until it was too late. And then I just kept driving. My mom told me to keep driving. She said if I stopped, everything was over. The wedding, the career, everything. The recording ended. The waveform froze on the wall. Derek sat down. Not deliberately, his legs simply stopped holding him, and he went down into the chair behind him, the way a structure goes down when the load-bearing element fails. His hands dropped into his lap. He stared at the tablecloth. Margaret turned toward him. "Derek." Her voice was sharp and low. "Derek, look at me." He did not look at her. Diane stood up from her chair slowly, the way a person stands when the floor beneath them has shifted and they are not certain of their balance. She looked at me across the table. Her face was doing something I had never seen it do in 32 years of marriage, moving through expressions too quickly for any one of them to land grief and confusion, and something that was almost anger, all passing across it in the space of a few seconds. "Raymond," she said, "how long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "I'm sorry it took this long." She pressed both hands flat on the tablecloth the way I had pressed mine before the evening started. She looked at Derek. She looked at Margaret. She looked at her daughter on the floor with Grandma Ruth's hand on her shoulder. Then she walked around the table past Margaret, past Derek, and she knelt on the hardwood floor on the other side of Lily from Grandma Ruth. She put her arms around her daughter and held on. Lily's hand came up and gripped her mother's sleeve. Pastor Glenn stood up. He walked to where Derek sat and stood behind him, not touching him, not speaking, simply present in the way that men of faith are present in moments when presence is the only honest thing left to offer. Margaret looked at the wall where the waveform was still frozen. Then she looked at me. For the first time in 3 years, Margaret Ashford had nothing arranged on her face. No warmth, no composure, no calculation. Just a woman standing at the end of something she had built and watching it come down. I reached into my jacket pocket and set the recorder on the table between us. "For the first time in 3 years," I said quietly, "neither of you has anything left to say." The dinner that Margaret Ashford had planned to last until 10 o'clock ended at 8:53. Pastor Glenn told me the exact time later. He had looked at his watch the moment Derek stood up and said he needed air, because Pastor Glenn always notes the precise moment when something significant ends. Derek walked out without looking at anyone. Through the foyer, out the front door, across the porch, and then nothing. Margaret gathered her purse from her chair with the careful movements of a woman conserving what remained of her composure. She looked at me once across the table, not with anger, not with pleading, but with something that lived in the space between those two things and had no name I could give it. Then she walked out the same way her son had, and the white Audi started in the driveway, and after a moment its engine faded down Carver Street and was gone. The room held itself very still. Diane's cousin Carol stood first. She touched Diane's shoulder, collected her husband Mike with a look, and they left without ceremony, the most respectful thing they could have done. The other cousins followed within minutes, each stopping to squeeze Lily's hand on the way out. Nobody said much. There was nothing adequate to say. Tommy dismantled the projector setup in the corner without being asked, folding the equipment into his backpack with the quiet efficiency of someone who understands that the work of a moment is different from the work of cleaning up after it. He stopped beside Lily on his way out, crouched to her level, said something I could not hear. Lily looked at him and nodded once. Tommy stood up and shook my hand with both of his and walked out into the May night. Pastor Glenn was last. He stood at the door with his jacket over his arm and looked at me with eyes that had seen more endings than most people accumulate in a lifetime. "You did what needed doing, Ray," he said. "The rest belongs to Lily." "I know," I said. He put his hand on my shoulder. Then he walked down the porch steps into the dark, and the house was quiet, and it was just the four of us, Diane, Grandma, Ruth, Lily, and me. Diane made a tea, which was what she did when she did not know what else to do with her hands. Grandma Ruth sat in the armchair closest to Lily, feet flat on the floor, upright and still. Lily sat on the couch with her cane across her knees and her hands wrapped around her mug. Her eyes on the middle distance that people look at when they are processing something too large to take in all at once. We did not talk much that first hour. There are moments in families when the most honest thing anyone can do is remain in the same room and let the silence be what it is. At 10:30, Lily looked up at me. "Dad," she said, "I don't want him in a courtroom." I waited. If we go criminal, he becomes something people feel sorry for. His lawyers make it about the accident, about how young he was, about one bad decision. She shook her head. "I don't want to give him a story where he gets to be the person who paid his debt. I want him to live with what he did every single day for the rest of his life. No verdict, no sentence, no moment where it's over." She looked at me with something I had not seen in her eyes in 3 years. Not anger, not grief, but a clear-eyed, unshakable certainty that belonged entirely to her. "Can we give the evidence to Detective Hansen without pressing charges?" "Yes," I said. "I called Hansen months ago. We submit everything formally, it goes into the permanent case record, and the decision about prosecution rests with us as the injured party. We can file without requesting criminal proceedings." I paused. "The record will exist forever, Lily. Anyone who looks will find it." She nodded once. "Then that's what I want." Diane reached over and took Lily's hand and held it without a word. The following morning, I drove to the Dayton Police Department on 2nd Street and sat across from Detective Hansen with the folder between us on his desk. He was older than I remembered, gray at the temples, reading glasses on a cord around his neck. The particular patience of a man who had stopped being surprised by human difficulty a long time ago. He went through each item methodically, asked a few questions, made notes in a small spiral notebook. When he finished, he looked at me over his glasses. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "with what's in this folder, I could file felony hit and run causing serious bodily harm under Ohio Revised Code 4549.02. That carries 2 to 8 years in state prison." He paused. "Case number stays active. Evidence logged and sealed. If your daughter ever changes her mind, this is here." "Thank you, Detective." He stood and shook my hand, and I walked out into a parking lot full of ordinary May sunlight. Tommy had posted everything the previous evening. GPS record insurance photograph, written summary of the receipt, and the recording to 3 Dayton community forums, and a regional news tip line under his own name. He wrote simply that he was the nephew of the mechanic whose daughter had been left on Birchwood Drive in March of 2021, that the family now knew who was responsible, and that the evidence was on file with the Dayton Police Department. By the following Monday, Derek had been placed on administrative leave from his real estate firm pending internal review. Two of Margaret's longest-standing clients ended their business relationships without public explanation. A woman who had attended the wedding at St. Andrew's Lutheran posted a detailed account of what she had witnessed in the dining room on the night of the 17th. That post was shared 412 times in 48 hours. Lily called me that Monday morning at 7:45. I was at the garage, coffee and hand bay doors open to the May air. "Dad." Her voice carried something I had not heard since before the accident. A lightness, not happiness exactly, but the quality of a voice that is no longer carrying something it was never meant to carry. "Good morning." "Good morning, baby girl," I said. A moment of quiet. "Then I want to go back to Birchwood Drive." I set my coffee down on the workbench. "Tell me when," I said. I opened the garage at 6 on the Tuesday after the dinner, same as I had for 28 years. Key in the lock. Bay doors up 1, 2, 3. Compressor on. Coffee maker on the shelf above the parts cabinet. 2 scoops, 4 cups. I stood at the workbench while it brewed and looked through the office doorway at the safe. Then I walked in, opened it, took out the folder labeled LH March 14, and carried it to the workbench. I put it in the top drawer. Not locked, not hidden. Filed the way I file completed work orders. Job done. Drawer closed. I poured my coffee and started the day. Gary Phelps from Belhaven Transport called at 8:45. I had not spoken to him since the morning in June of 2022, when he had ended 11 years in 4 minutes. He went quiet after identifying himself the way people go quiet when they owe something and are working out how to say it. "Ray, I saw what came out about your daughter, and about who was spreading those stories." His voice was steady but strained. "I owe you an apology. What I did pulling that contract without giving you a chance to answer, that wasn't right. I'd like to talk about bringing Holloway Auto back if you're open to it." A school bus moved past the bay door orange in the morning light. "Come by the garage this week," I said. "We'll talk." He exhaled like a man putting something down. "Thank you, Ray." Grace called at 9. She had been calling every morning since the dinner. Her voice had a quality it had not carried in a long time. Easy, unhurried, not managing anything. Just talking to her father. Diane called at 10 from Grandma Ruth's place on Elmwood, where she had been for 4 days. Her voice was recalibrated the way an instrument sounds after it has finally been properly tuned. "I chose comfort over truth," she said, "and my daughter paid for it. But Raymond, what you carried alone for 3 years, for all of us." Her voice tightened. "I see it now. I see all of it." "That means more than you know," I said. "She told me she and Ruth were coming Friday. I said I would make pot roast. That week I serviced 4 vehicles and repainted the sign above the garage door, the one that had faded from green to gray around 2015. 2 evenings. The letters came out clean and dark green. Holloway Auto. I stood on the sidewalk and thought about my Uncle Bill, the man who had taught me the trade. He would have liked the new sign. Pastor Glenn came Monday morning with 2 coffees. He sat on the stool across from me and stayed quiet for a while, which was one of the things I valued most about him. I tore that page out, folded it once, and dropped it in the trash. Pastor Glenn watched. He did not ask what it was. "There is a time to hold on," he said, "and a time to let go." "Yeah," I said. "I think I found mine." At 5 in the morning on the 28th of May, my phone buzzed. I was already awake. 4 words from Lily. "Come drive me, Dad." I got up. I dressed. I poured coffee into a thermos and picked up my keys, garage key, house key, and the small red wrench keychain Grace had given me the Christmas before last. I took my keys and walked out into the dark. That morning on Birchwood Drive, Lily walked 310 meters on her own. She stopped at the telephone pole. She placed her hand on it for 7 seconds. Then she turned around and walked back to my truck. "It's just a road, Dad," she said. "Yeah," I said. "It is. I have thought about that a lot since." This is a grandpa story, not a story about revenge, not about winning. It is a family story about what a father carries when he has no other choice, and what it costs and what it is worth. Here is my honest advice: do not do what I did. Do not carry it alone. Find someone you trust and speak the truth before the silence becomes its own kind of prison. I waited 3 years. Lily paid for some of those years in ways I cannot undo. What I know now is this: God does not ask us to carry everything alone. He asks us to be faithful with what we have, one day at a time. That is the only grandpa story worth telling, and the only family story worth living. If this reached you today, if any part of Raymond Holloway's story felt familiar, leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to stay for the next family story, subscribe so you never miss one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. The stories ahead contain some fictionalized elements built for reflection and understanding. If that is not what you are looking for, no hard feelings. Choose what is right for you.